class. So because it's controlled by the length of your lens and the distance to your subject and all these things. But the most important thing is probably also just this f-stop number that you're at. I promise we're gonna come back to it a little bit more, but depth of field has to do with, oh, I never showed you guys this essay. We're gonna come back to this. I'm gonna show you, we're gonna talk about this essay, and I'm gonna show you this flower image. And everybody's seen, you can see the flowers are nice and in focus, and what's behind it? Just this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful blur, right? This is an excellent example of shallow depth of field. So what you have is a super wide open aperture that's allowing this to be in focus, and then you have this beautiful blur at the back. So think about portraits. Typically, like if I was gonna take a portrait of someone, I don't usually care what's behind them. You know, you wanna see their face. So if I was taking a portrait of someone, I would choose f2 and not f22. At f22, everything's in focus. You would be in focus all the way back to the, to the back of the room at f22. If I just want you in focus and I want everybody else to be out of focus, I'm going to choose that wide open aperture of f2. So that's aperture a little bit. I also want to go back to this essay that I forgot to show you. We were talking about like showing a sense of place and showing all these things and creating your beautiful travel story. This is an excellent example. This is like a story about an artist in residence. So we talked about details, right? Here's your detail. Beautiful flower image, cast of characters, portraits, take portraits, make portraits. So here he is sitting on the porch. Sense of place. Here's a house. Can't tell about, an artist residence if you don't show it. So here's a picture of the house. More details, beautiful garden. Here's a cast of characters, somebody working. Talked specifically magic moments. The dog running in. It's perfect. Again, link back to some details. So that's like a whole 7-image, photo essay, and it tells the whole story of this place. So just something to keep in mind. Let's go back to blowing your mind with all these photography terms. So we've got shutter speed, which is controlling the amount of, the amount of light that's being let in by your shutter. Aperture has to do with the opening that's coming through, through your optics. And then now we've got ISO. ISO, does anybody remember shooting film? If you do, it actually makes it a little easier sometimes. So film, you used to go to the store and you would buy, you'd buy Kodak 100, or you'd buy Kodak 400, or you'd buy Kodak 1600. And there was a reason. So Kodak 100 is, I'm gonna go shoot outside on a bright sunny day. Kodak 400 is, well, I might be in the woods and it might be a little bit dark. 1600 is, I'm gonna be out shooting at night. And what stinks is once it's in here all loaded up, you're pretty well committed. I'm shooting, 400, I'm shooting 100, I'm shooting 1600. The beauty of these cameras is on the fly, I can go from being outside on a bright sunny day and then shooting at ISO 100, and then I can walk outside or walk inside, to a dark room, and I just change that ISO, change it, and then you walk back outside and you just change it. It's just another thing. ISO, it's International Standard Organization, and they're basically talking about the sensitivity to light. So when it used to be film, it was the sensitivity of the film. ISO 1600 is significantly more sensitive than ISO 400, which is more sensitive than ISO 100. It's the same thing, only now it's a digital sensor. So when I put it on 100, it's not as sensitive as when I put it on 400 or when I put it on 1600. All the way up to these cameras, go up. It's ridiculous. This one's like 6400 plus. You can practically shoot in the dark. I think Nikon just released a camera that's like, I don't know, it's ridiculous. Google it. So one more thing that you can control. I think ISO is actually the easiest, believe it or not, because the idea is you always want to shoot at the lowest ISO that you can. That 1600 film I talked about was actually really beautiful. It created something called grain in your images that was actually sought after. I mean, to be honest, these are Annie Leibovitz photos, and if you've heard of Annie Leibovitz, you know, she probably shot these on film. And you can actually, I mean, it's raining, so it's weird, but there's like a grittiness to it, and that's grain, and it's from film, and it's beautiful. So digital creates something called noise. When you start shooting in those high ISOs, it starts to create something in your image called noise, and it's usually like little purple and blue icky specks, and it's not pretty. And the way that you avoid that is by shooting at the lowest ISO possible. So when you're outside on a sunny day, don't shoot at 1600, you know, shoot at 100. When you're inside and you need more light, you know, go ahead and start cranking up that ISO and, you know, shoot where you need to shoot to get, you know, to where you're going. We're going to keep coming back to all this, I promise. And this is our quick, like, I cannot possibly teach you photography in our, you know, hour and a half class, but I want you to hear these terms, and I want you to start thinking about them, and then I want everyone to go home and be excited and take another class and start playing with your camera, and all this will start to make sense, I promise. Composition, depth of field, lens choice, light, we're actually going to get into all of those a little bit more, so I'm going to go on, but again, I talked so long. I want you to just start like hearing those terms and getting this idea of exposure. Shutter speed, aperture, ISO. They all let in light in their own way, and they're all going to control this idea of exposure. And it's all creative. You know, it's the choices that you make. You know, what's more important to me? Is the shutter speed more important to me right now, or is aperture more important to me? You know, and that's going to help create that image that you really want. All right, composition. So composition, you know, again, like back to that, like they just didn't quite look the way I wanted. Choosing your point of view, using the rule of thirds. I actually gave you a little image, and we're going to look at a lot more as far as rule of thirds. They've basically proven that when you look at an image, I mean, they've done, you know, electrodes on the brain, and they can actually watch where your eye goes in an image, and your eye, you know, your eye tracks onto these certain areas of an image, and that's where you want to put the most exciting stuff. If you put the most exciting stuff somewhere else, it takes your eye longer to get there, and it's not as powerful of an image. As far as composition, it has a lot to do with what you put in the image and a lot to do with what you leave out. Being really, really careful about things like, wow, look at that amazingly beautiful image of my child, and there's like a trash can right there, and you know, it's just this idea, and like maybe if I just stepped from like here over to here, now the trash can's not in frame. So that's, you know, it's this idea of like, choose that point of view and choose what goes in the frame and choose what's not in the frame. I mean, image killers are power lines. Anything like that usually, I mean, unless you're photographing the power lines, trash cans, too much information. You know, sometimes you're just so overwhelmed. I'm sure we've all been somewhere completely gorgeous and you're just overwhelmed. You really do have to choose, like, what is this image about? Like, sometimes you can't put everything in it. So again, like the idea of composition and defining your subject, just a lot of that has to do with choosing what's in the image and then choosing what's not in the image. And then I wanted to talk a little bit more about photographing people, you know, especially when you're traveling. You know, we talked a lot about these big, heavy cameras can be super intimidating. You know, making sure you keep, you know, respect is key. Like, keep good distance. If you don't speak the language, it's pretty amazing what, like, you know, a smile and a head nod will do. As soon as somebody turns around like this, let it go. Never be afraid to ask someone to take a portrait, because of course, what's the worst that they can say is no. And then, you ask somebody else. It's not, most people actually are pretty comfortable and pretty, we have a pretty camera saturated world these days. I'm even okay with asking someone in terrible light to move somewhere else so I can take a good photo of them instead of a terrible one. So, just respect, making sure you have some sort of verbal or nonverbal agreement to take their photo. France, nobody mentioned going to France, but they actually have very, very strict street photography rules. So understanding where you're going and what those rules are. Children kind of have their own special, definitely make sure you have some sort of mom permission, or just make sure you're very, very cautious when photographing children. But don't be afraid to go out and make portraits of people. Alright, so back to that idea of rule of thirds, and I apologize again, these images are hard to see. But you can imagine drawing your lines, and you can see, there he is right there he is right here. Same with horizons. If you're doing a lot of nature type photography, or really anything, just be aware, look at every single one of those images on the wall. Be aware of your horizon line. A horizon line straight in the middle of your picture is usually not nearly as exciting as a horizon line where, there's a choice made on that second image. Which is more exciting, the sky in that image or the ground? Well, the ground, is more exciting. So I'm going to show 2/3 of that, and I'm going to show 1/3 of the sky. Same with both of the other images. So there's that. Again, rule of thirds. Tent here, moon there. There's that, the sky. Again, these photos are terrible, sorry. Or the images are terrible. The sky in this image is way more exciting kind of than what's going around down here. So there's your horizon line. We're only showing 1/3, and then we're showing 2/3 of the sky. Okay, lens choice. For those of you with SLRs, or even, again, your smartphone, your smartphone typically has a pretty wide angle lens on it. But you can buy little telephoto lenses and all kinds of fun stuff. So let's talk a little bit about that. A wide angle, they're measured in these, millimeters, and it basically just has to do with your field of vision. So a wide angle is a 20 to 35. Normal is considered 45 to 60. I mean, that's pretty much what you see typically as you just walk around. And then telephoto is going to start to compress things and allow you to see things farther away. So that 85, 105, 300 would be considered a telephoto lens. And if you were going to go buy a lens, I would tell you go buy a 50. They call it the nifty 50. It tends to be optically a pretty, inexpensive lens. You can also, and we're going to talk about this word speed. So speed has to do with the maximum aperture of a lens. We talked about this one, the maximum aperture is f2. This one, the maximum aperture is 1.8. Actually, it's 1.4. This one is 1.4. Doesn't seem like a huge difference, but that's significantly more light. It's 2 times as much light actually that I can let into this lens as I can this lens. Most lenses that come as a kit lens with a camera, your maximum aperture is usually about 3.5. And then sometimes as you zoom out, your maximum aperture continues to go down. So it might be, your maximum aperture might be 3.5 here, but by the time I get to here, my maximum aperture is actually only about a 5. So these are all things to think about, when purchasing lenses. So pro level lenses, I mean, this is a fixed focal length. It's a 50. No matter what I do, it's a 50. This is obviously a zoom lens. It goes from 18 to 55. This is also one of those lenses that starts out at like a 2.8, and then by the time I'm done, it's like an f5. Most other most other lenses, as I continue to do my zooming, like this one stays 2.8 no matter what I'm doing. If I'm at 70, I can have a maximum aperture of 2.8. If I'm at 200, I can have a maximum aperture of 2.8. The difference in that is price, totally. Why would you want that? Again, like you saw the beautiful flower with the gorgeous blurred background. If you want that, you have to have a lens that's capable, that's capable of shooting that. So speed is just jargon. How fast is your lens? The faster it is, the wider the maximum aperture. So like a 1.4 is super fast,